Hey, Michael, first thing first, thank you so much for taking your time out and joining us on the Growth Mindset podcast. It is an honor to have you here.
Well, I'm intrigued, and thank you very much for inviting me. I hope I can make some contribution to your program that's positive or in some way.
Absolutely. And I'm sure, Michael, because I've read your books and there are a lot of very interesting things that I've come across. And during the course of this conversation, I definitely want to touch upon those. But before we get started with the conversation, Michael, would you like to give our audience a quick insight about who Michael is? What do you do? Where you
I'm a I'm a writer. I've spent most of my life, the last 50 years of my life, abroad. I'm from America. I've spent most of my adult life traveling in different places. I reside in Turkey. Right now, we're here. I'm on the Red Sea in a place called Guna in Egypt. I've lived in England, and I've spent time in Morocco and North Africa, a lot of time in Egypt. My family is here. I have family in the US. So, I've been all over, and I had a background when I was quite young in the theater and in film and performance and that sort of thing, but I abandoned that after becoming a Muslim.
One thing you mentioned very interesting was, you basically became a Muslim, right, at a young age. Could you kind of walk us through what got you towards Islam? How did you stumble across it? And then how did you accept it? Like, what was your first experience with it?
Well, it was a fairly swift process, but I would say that I mean, I've written about this in a book that I wrote called Heart's Turn, which is about tauba, but it's also about coming to an understanding of belief, of faith, coming to faith, and I included my own story in uh, in the context of the overall narrative of all the other stories that I reported in the book. So I would recommend anyone who's genuinely interested in finding out something about me to read that story rather than listen to a long, drawn out, and less articulate way of, or less disciplined way of retelling that story. But basically, when I was young, I was in the theater. I was a young actor, and this was during the 1960s and 70s when there was this cultural revolution in the U.S. that challenged a lot of the beliefs that my generation inherited from our parents, which were very materialistic and so on. And there was a sex, drugs, and rock and roll aspect to that revolution. There was also a spiritual aspect, and quite a few people explored different kinds of religious experiences rather than the mainstream Judeo-Christian experience in the U.S. So people were exploring Hinduism, Buddhism, and probably the least explored religion was Islam. And somehow I was exposed. Actually, it was my cousin who exposed me to writings of Sufi writings of Sufi sages, and some of the writings I discovered later on were not particularly authentic or were corrupted in one way or another. But I didn't know the difference. I was fascinated by one thing which I understood. If you know anything about performance or acting or theater, you go through a process of rehearsal. And rehearsal in French, rehearsal is called répétition, which is repetition, is repeating something over and over and over and over again until it sinks in. And I would say any talented actor has an experience of suddenly becoming the character that they're pretending to be inwardly. You don't look different, but everything changes. Your fellow actors, your director, everyone sees it, but it's not physically different. You inhabit the character, and I think it's one of the secrets that keeps many performers, many actors in what is a very, very difficult business and very insecure and unstable. And most of the time you're out of work. But the moment that you become this character is very intoxicating. So I understood this idea of repeating something over and over again, but I began to have a kind of reservation about this because most of the characters that you inhabit are extremely flawed, because this is what drama is. Drama is about people, who are going through some sort of conflict,
Mhm.
and the resolution isn't always is either tragic or comic, but it's either upbeat or downbeat. But you still have to contemplate things like jealousy, greed, hatred, rage, all these negative emotions. And that started to bother me because I thought, well, this is, even though if I'm playing a murderer, I'm not going to go to prison or be executed for murder or anything or get arrested, but it is affecting my heart.
Mm.
And this was linked to something that happened to me when I was about 16 years old. And again, this is recounted in Heart's Turn much more fluently, I think. When I was about 16, at that point in my life, I was pretty shallow. I mean, I wasn't, I loved to read, but I didn't read philosophy or religious books or anything. But I was in the theater, and I think my three priorities were theater, music, and girls, basically. I was probably not in that order, means to an end, let's say. But
Yeah.
anyway, I was like that. I didn't have any kind of tragedy in my life or anything. But one evening, I was half between sleeping and wakefulness and sleep. I was falling asleep, and I suddenly lost all my faculties. But it was a kind of metaphorical loss. It was like an involuntary
Mm.
meditation or contemplation. And I realized, and I lost everything. I lost my sight, hearing, speech, movement, breath, everything. And I was in this abyss. And and remember thinking, in a real panic. It was a horrible, frightening experience because it was involuntary and
Mm.
unexpected. And I remember in this kind of abyss where I had lost everything, saying, well, if I'm not all these things, who am I? Who am I? And I realized at that point that I was going to die for the first time. I mean, I was 16 at that time. I was young. And so this was incredibly disorienting. And it really it put me in a very strange experience. I mean, I was so affected by this that when I finally came back from this experience, which only lasted moments,
Mm.
seemed like period of time, but it was just, very sudden. But it was so powerful that I literally got out of bed and went to a mirror to see if I still existed or if I had been turned into something other than who I was. And this disoriented me. And I thought, well, somebody has got to help me out of this. So I broached the subject to my parents. And, I thought maybe this is something this is a phase you just go through or something. And so I mentioned it, and they just were baffled. They didn't know what to say about that. And I had a girlfriend at the time, and I mentioned it to her, and she just I drew a blank. So I felt very alienated from people for a period of time until I finally kind of um, gave up the worrying about it. And I figured, well, it'll all become clear eventually as I go on. Years later, I came upon the writings of Ramana Maharshi, who was from your area, from the south of India, was a great Hindu saint. And his practice, he had a similar experience, albeit probably infinitely more powerful than what happened to me, because I came out of it and went back into doing plays and things,
Yeah.
and all the stuff that you do as a teenager. But he did. He never did. And his essential practice was, "Who am I?" I think it's Namyar, something like this, like that. I can't remember but anyway, that effect that was something that was kind of hovering in haunting me in a way, that experience. And it became much clearer when I discovered Islam. But it took me a while because I first was really interested in Sufism, and I didn't connect it directly with Islam, although it was kind of there. But most of the writings the publications that were available at that time in the U.S., which was in the 60s and 70s, did not connect Islam with Sufism, or did in a
Mm,
way that kind of made it sound as if Tasawwuf, which is the traditional description of Sufism, Tasawwuf, made it sound as if it was something like separate from Islam, that it was
mm,
this separate thing that is connected to Islam. And there's still that narrative going around with people, and that's one of the problems. In fact, we have Islam has been described as being composed of Iman, of Islam, which is the external practices of Islam and the admonitions that come from the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam in the Quran, the Holy Quran. And there's Iman, which is the domain of faith, of belief in these in the message of Islam. And then there's Ihsan, and Ihsan has been described by the Prophet والسلام, as to worship God as if you see him, for while
mm,
you do not see him, he sees you. And this is the domain of Tasawwuf. This is where the practice of Tasawwuf is completely, totally integrated into the body of the practice and system of Islam. You can't separate tasawwuf at all, and you can't really fully practice Islam without tasawwuf. It's just these are the sciences, and they're rooted in the Quran and the Hadith. So anyway, this is something that when I became a Muslim, though, it was by instinct. I knew nothing about Islam, but I went on a kind of a spiritual search. I discovered Sufism in California by reading, and I, I read, I became obsessed with it, actually. This idea of dhikr, of invocation, because I understood the idea of repetition, that if you say something over
mm.
and over, affects the heart, just as a rehearsal will affect the way that you understand a character, that you inhabit a character. And I wanted to inhabit something that was luminous rather than dark, let's say. So I became really obsessed with it, but I really knew nothing about Islam, and I didn't know anything about the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. But I saw someone told me about a group I was in Southern California. In Northern California, there was a group that was a group of Sufi Muslims who had come over and were visiting. And I went to a kind of an open gathering, and I saw for the first time a group of people praying in congregation. And that I said, that's it. I understand. Because I'd seen gurus, and, I'd mixed with Hindus and Buddhists and Jewish rabbis and all. I was looking under every rock and stone in California, and this was the first thing that really made sense, because there was a form and a practice and something that was very understandable. So that's how I came to Islam. It was just on an instinct, and then I
Well,
kind of dropped show business because I just felt that I couldn't sustain that lifestyle. It would have required too many compromises, and I was
mm.
young enough, so I hadn't invested that much of my life in that world.
Makes sense. I really love, how you've connected theater with repetition, and then repetition connecting directly with Islam and your inner states of the heart, right? I mean, it made a lot of
Right,
sense because the analogy that you gave your entire life story around, how you were looking for everything. And I understand the time of the 1960s, as far as I've read, was obviously a revolutionary time, right? Like a lot of figures like I think Malcolm X, Martin Luther King were rising. They were on those streets promoting all of this. There are a lot of revolution, as you mentioned, right? People were trying to do a lot of things at the same time, and it's very fascinating. You discovered Islam. That's amazing, Alhamdulillah. And one of the important things, which I think was something that I wanted to touch upon, was the importance of travel. You mentioned you traveled to a lot of different countries, right? And you met a lot of different scholars. So I want to kind of understand a little bit more further. And this is more for our people that are actually looking out, trying to learn more about Islam, or even for Muslims, right? Like, what is the
right.
importance of travel, and how should we look for teachers? Like, what kind of signs should we look out for Who's the right teacher for us? What would your thoughts be?
Well, one of my dear friends, Dr. Mustafa Al-Badawi, who's he's a psychiatrist who lives in Egypt. He's from Egypt, but he lives in Medina, and he's a great spiritual soul, and he's translated many, many books now. I don't know how many, but he and I shared spiritual guide, Habib Ahmed Mashur al-Haddad, who is one of the great Ba'alawi scholar sheikhs of the 20th century. Anyway, Mustafa said something recently to me which I really made an impression. He said, "You have to remember that this is not about people. This is about God guiding one to himself by any means." And people misunderstand that. They think that it's all about the externalities of what's going on, like this sheikh or this Sufi order, tariqa. And Mustafa went on to say, he said, Allah will sometimes guide you to someone who is not authentic to teach you something. You learn something by this. And I think this is misunderstood by a lot of young people. They think that they'll go to somebody and they have some kind of a magic wand and they wave it over them and all their troubles are solved and resolved. And that is not the case at all. It doesn't happen like that. The awliya, the saints, the teaching to the authorized teachers, let's say, they're human beings. So they're human. They're not infallible. They can make mistakes, but what you get from a very pure-hearted sheikh, let's say, an authentic teacher, is a lack of ego. The ego is snuffed out. They don't have ego. And that's sometimes very difficult to sort of really perceive because there's nothing outward. They don't come floating in on a cloud or anything, or levitate or do some miraculous thing. There's some of these people are people that you would maybe walk over if they were sitting on the street. You wouldn't necessarily know who they were. And in fact, Abul Abbas al-Morsi, who was the great Shazali, the successor to Imam Abul Hassan al-Shazali, radiallahu anhu, he said it's harder to know a friend of God, Wali Allah, than it is to know God. It's hard to see because we know God by his perfections, but how we know someone who is a creature like we are, who eats as we eat and sleeps as we sleep. And there's I think a misunderstanding that these people are, kind of magical beings or mystical beings. I mean, there are things that happen, but it's not from them, and they know it. It's from God. All they can do is that they've been on this journey, and they can help keep you out of harm's way and give you guidance, saying, "Don't do that. Not a good idea." Or they'll give you almost all of them. The transaction is through the distribution of one kind of invocation or practice or something or another. It's all very practical, and they know when to give someone something. I mean, there's a story that I heard from Habib Ali Jufri. I don't know, he's well known in the cyber world. I think he has a following. But Habib Ali talked about a young spiritual aspirant who went to a sheikh and he demanded to be given the Ismul Azam, the great name, which is the repetition of the name of Allah in a certain way, which is the sort of the ultimate. If you read in the text, it's what all the shuyukh recommend. Interestingly, these days, this is not so much the case because people are so distracted and they're living in such a corrupted environment that it can have a very different impact on one. But anyway, the sheikh refused to give him the great name. He said, "No, you're not ready for it." And the young man was very upset that he had been rejected that way. So he went out in the street and he saw these young punks beating up an old man. He just didn't feel strong enough to be able to to stand up for the man. So he charged back to the sheikhs, uh, to the sheikhs, zawiya or khanka or derga, whatever you want to call it. He said, there's a man outside being beaten up, and I'm not strong enough to be able to intervene. I need the Ismail Azam. I need the great name. And the sheikh said, well, the man that's being beaten up, he has the great name. Yes, in 2022, Peter Sanders, the photographer Peter Sanders, and I published a book series of 9 volumes, which were called Exemplars for Our Time, which with the specific aim of answering these kinds of questions. And what I'd like to do is to read from this book. This is, I think, extremely important for anyone who's interested in the path to try to get hold of a copy of this book, because it explains very clearly the nature of spirituality, Islamic spirituality, and also how to determine whether you're in the presence of an authentic teacher or if there's a problem. So in terms of travel, let me find this section, because it's extremely important. Yeah. Okay. A master within the Islamic spiritual tradition is known as a teaching sheikh, a sheikh murabbi, an individual with authority to lead disciples on the inward journey toward the knowledge of God. Several, but not all of the exemplars profiled in the series that we published were recognized as teaching sheikhs. A teaching sheikh is a physician of spiritual diseases of the heart. Just as it is unwise and downright dangerous to self-medicate for a physical illness, it's even more dangerous to try treating oneself for spiritual ailments. On this subject, Muli al-Arabi al-Darqawi is blunt and beautifully pragmatic. He wrote, anyone who wants to learn a craft, regardless of what it is, needs a master. And in the craft of Tasawwuf, Sufism, this is even more so. Someone who claims that he has no need of a sheikh has turned his back to the door and his face to the wall. If we had remained upon the way brought to us by the messenger of God, peace be upon him, had our hearts and limbs not come to oppose it, then, by God, what the messenger of God brought would suffice us from needing a sheikh. But when we ourselves have changed so much, when both our hearts and limbs have become callous and turbidity has engulfed us, how can we not be in need of a master? Only a person who is proud, ignorant, or self-satisfied would ever say such a thing. Ibn Shayban said, whoever has no master has no way. To remove intermediaries is disorder, while to attribute to them actions is a deviation. In other words, they teach you, but they don't do it for you. They don't do anything. They are guides on the spiritual path, and through their insight and experience and illumination, they can point you in the right direction. But they don't do it for you. They don't wave a magic wand over you, and everything is perfect. What he means by this last statement is that any action on the spiritual path that brings results is from the grace and power of God, not from the sheikh. So to attribute to a sheikh the actions which bring results is a form of idolatry, shirk. Sidi Muhammad ibn Habib wrote that it is an obligation for anyone who seeks the presence of God to take as his teacher a living master. He goes on to say, evidence for this comes from the words of God Most High, O you who believe, fear God, and be with those who are utterly sincere. To be with someone means physical companionship, not just companionship in spirit. Also, the Most High says, and follow the way of the one who turns to me. In this latter verse, God Most High commands the Son to follow the Father of souls rather than the Father of physical forms, because the Father of the soul fosters the spiritual dimension, while the Father of the body fosters the sensory dimension. And what a vast difference there is between someone whose aspiration is towards the sensory and someone whose aspiration is toward the spiritual. Moreover, the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, said, a person's religion will be that of his dearest friend. So let each of you look carefully at whom he takes as his dearest friend. In the community of Muhammad, from the earliest times until now, there has been agreement that the first thing required of an aspirant, as soon as he becomes aware of his heedlessness towards God, is to depend upon a sheikh who can counsel and guide him, who knows the faults and pretensions of the ego and also their remedies, and who himself has completed the training of his own ego and its desires. The teacher can then give the aspirant insight into his own faults and bring him out of a state of being engrossed in the sensual. And for the one who has no sheikh to direct him to the path of guidance, the devil will surely direct it to the path of ruin. So adamant are the Sufis of the need for a master that they say, whoever has no sheikh, the devil is his sheikh. This adage has been the source of consternation to many young seekers today. We certainly don't want to be led by the devil, but then how to find a genuine sheikh in this time? On the one hand, we're living in the age of Shaykh Google and YouTube, and far too many young people are trying to go it alone online, cherry-picking information and remedies from an indiscriminate deluge of blogs, vlogs, videos, and Facebook screeds. And on the other hand, there are a bewildering number of bearded, robed, and turbaned sheikhs, and even a few sheikhs out there on tour and online. And then there are the self-appointed cyber vigilante groups out to take down spiritual imposters on social media they brand as fake sheikhs. This is a very confusing and perilous state of affairs. It has come to the point that a number of our most respected Western Muslim scholars have become publicly ambivalent or even antagonistic to spiritual authority. When I asked one distinguished scholar, thoroughly grounded in the spiritual sciences, why he openly dismissed the Sufi orders in this time, as ossified and irrelevant, he replied that there were too many unqualified charlatans posing as spiritual masters. This struck me as a little like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but I knew who he was referring to, and I could see his point. I once asked Mullah Hashim al-Balghiti, who was my sheikh, about people of false claims. He shrugged, smiled, and said, this is an old story. And indeed it is. There have been men and women of false claims since Musaylima, the false prophet, and his wife Sajah bint al-Harith ibn Suhaib. So not surprisingly, the single most frequently asked question sincere seekers pose these days is, how can I find a sheikh? There's no definitive answer, and in fact, there are opposing views. 40 years ago, I asked the how to find a sheikh question to Sidi Fudul al-Hawari, who was the Khalifa of Sidi Muhammad ibn Habib. His answer to me was, in these days, it's impossible to find a true sheikh, so make the Sharia your sheikh. Another eminent teaching sheikh I used to sit with during the same period, the Syrian master Sheikh Abdul Qadir Isa, contested Sidi Fudul's conclusion, saying that the seeker must search those in his land and ask around and investigate, looking with resoluteness and detail for a spiritual guide, paying no attention to the people who claim that there is not to be found any true spiritual guide in our age. He was directly opposed. What he's saying is the opposite of Sifudul. If he is unable to find anyone in his own city, then he must look in other cities. Do you not see how the sick person travels to another city for treatment if he cannot find a specialist in his own town? Or if the doctors in his locality are unable to determine his illness and prescribe a cure? Indeed, treating the ailments of the souls calls for doctors even more skilled than the doctors of bodies. So who is right and who is wrong? Mullah Nasruddin presides over the court as a judge. The plaintiff stands up and makes his case. The mullah says, "You're right." The defendant stands up and protests and makes his defense. The mullah says to the defendant, "You're right." A court official says, "Maulana, they can't both be right." And the mullah replies, "You're right." Such is the case with Sidi Fudul and Sheikh Abdul Qadir. They're both right. Sidi Fudul's advice is absolutely on point because without adhering to the Sharia, we have no way of taking on or benefiting from a spiritual path in the first place, nor the guidance of a teaching sheikh, much less being able to recognize one. The Sharia is our foundation, our safe harbor, and our criterion for guidance. The Qadri master Sheikh Muhammad Haidar al Jilani has said, everything that contravenes the Sharia of God is rejected. This is fundamental.
Mm,
And this is one of the problems with many young people today is that they want to take a mystical spiritual path without the foundational knowledge of just being simply a Muslim. And you cannot separate Tasawwuf and Islamic spirituality from Islam. It's absolutely, and you cannot be an Orthodox Sunni Muslim without without a Sufi path. It's integral to the practice of Islam. You have Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. And Islamic spirituality, which is called Tasawwuf or Sufism, is the science of Ihsan. It is total, but you cannot also follow Sufism without Sharia. And when I used to
mm.
sit with Sheikh Abdul Qadir Isa, every time I came to him, this is when I was quite young and looking, he said, Harun, you have to follow, you have to have a living sheikh. Um, this is very important. The sheikh has to be alive.
I think you've touched upon a lot of important pointers, and also at the same time you've given some sayings of some of the very prominent scholars that we know of today, right? And
Right.
people that have passed on. One of the primary things, and this is something that I also know is more like a debate, and I always tell people, especially the Muslims brothers and sisters, that stay away from debate, right? You and I are not as scholars. We should not be talking about what is right, what is wrong. On a basic scale, we know what is right, and I think that's the Sharia, right? What is right, what is
Right.
wrong. Let's take that, but let's not get into debates, because then there are like the scholars that you named, they've spent their entire lives studying about Islam, hadith, like they've spent
Yes.
all the years just reading those and coming up to speed and sharing that knowledge, and we are in no position to go ahead and say, okay, this person is right, that person is wrong, because we have not spent the same amount of hard work or effort in learning about Islam. Yeah. So
What you're saying is absolutely true. First of all, I mean, my teacher, Sayyid Omar Abdullah, radiallahu anhu, uh,
uh,
said that in this time, people, Westerners, I think he got this from his sheikh, what he called Europeans. At this point in time, it includes someone like you, even though you're living in, I think you're living in India, right?
yes.
Yeah. So, but you're basically Western educated. So, and he said that Westerners have the greatest capacity to understand metaphysics and spirituality. But the problem is they have bad habits, and we know this. I entered Islam at the age of 23. That means that I have 23 years, my formative years, of bad habits that I've been, and even if, you have a few young people who become Muslim very early, let's say at the age of 14 or 15, but they have 14 years of bad habits.
Mm,
The shuyukh that I have been blessed to have been able to sit with and become close to, these are people that were literally born into a spiritual tradition. And from infancy, they were being nurtured. They became hafiz of Quran and muhaddithin, and they were they knew deeply knew the foundational knowledge that most of us don't have. When I entered Islam, I jumped into doing Dhikr and uh, the kinds of Sufi practices that adepts were doing at the same time. None of us really received sort of a foundational education in terms of Aqidah, Kalam, these basic knowledges that are necessary. So we have to play catch up. And also we're dealing with very bad habits. They may be innocent enough, but they are impediments to spiritual progress. And in fact, there's another side of this subject which is very important to understand. And what I'm not sure where. Imam Abdullah al-Haddad, radiallahu anhu, he basically said, he said in the 18th century, he said, we are no longer in the time for the muqarrabun, for the people of intense spirituality that we read in the Quran, the Yameen and Ahl al-Shimal. He said, for people of the Ahl al-Shimal, the conditions don't exist any longer for this kind of intense spirituality and self-denial and asceticism. It's just, we're not in this time any longer. And we've seen the deterioration of spirituality in our time. I mean, my generation, when we were your age or younger, we were exposed to people of intense spirituality who had reached stations of knowledge, and it was evident and palpable. You could see what who they were, and these people are very hard to find any longer. They exist, but they're not as evident. And this is just in the space of the last 50 years. Allah conceals these people because basically most of the world doesn't recognize the value of spirituality any longer. I mean, even people who are, I think, with all the best intentions, they're trying to seek a spiritual path. They don't really understand what it's about and how to go about it, and they're full of bad habits and things that they need to overcome. So,
Yeah. And I think that is what I'm trying to kind of bridge. I'm hoping to kind of probably shed that light by talking to people like you who've gone through this journey, who've interacted with a lot of scholars all over the world, right? Now, I think you would have kind of heard this, and this is pretty common these days among the youth, right?
mm,
Where they would just go ahead and probably, as you mentioned, Shaykh Google, or they'll just go online and search for things like this, and they would, instead of learning from a teacher, authentic teacher, they might just, you know what, there are hadiths that actually say that if you just follow sunnah in the Quran, you are guided. And then they don't feel the need of be like working or sitting in with a teacher to kind of understand those hadiths, understand its meaning, and just kind of read it through, and just whatever is mentioned in whatever they find on the hadiths, they just kind of interpret it, and then they try to then defend and say what their meanings are, right? Have you come across those scenarios, or have you had
oh
similar
yeah.
challenges in the past? Okay.
Oh, yes. I mean, there are different aspects of this. I mean, there are people who are extremely pious. I mean, I know many people who are far more pious and religious than I am, and I would say that they're better people than many of us are. But they have no attachment to a teaching sheikh. They're going along. They read Quran. They pray. They do nawafil and so on. And I once asked Sheikh Mohammed Al Jinani, who's from the Gambia. Well, I said, what's the difference between someone like that, who is extremely pious, and someone who is evidently on a spiritual path, who has a teacher and so on? And he said something very interesting. I hadn't really thought about it. He said that an extremely pious person is like someone who puts money in the bank. They have someone who saves money, and it just they they add to their wealth, their spiritual wealth, and they become very wealthy indeed through their piety and sincerity as well. I mean, if they're doing it for some selfish, egotistical reason or to gain something in the world, then that's a different story. But a sincere, pious person is like someone with a very hefty bank account. Whereas someone who is on a spiritual path moves from one station to the next, to the next. In other words, now that's assuming that they're following the teaching of their sheikh, that they are diligent in following their exercises, their practices, and so on, that they do the litany and so on. But this is the difference. And one person could be exactly the same for 50, 60 years, and someone on the path could be, after 50 or 60 years, have certain knowledges and experiences that the other doesn't have. Everything is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Bishop.
This this issue is, I mean, for example, Sifudul al-Hawari was the designated successor for Muhammad ibn al-Habib. Sheikh Muhammad ibn al-Habib died in 1972, and he was 100 years old. And Sifudul had been designated as his Khalifa or successor, and he couldn't do it. He said, I just can't do it. And he explained to friends of mine that he lived in a small house in Fez, and he was elderly, at least in his probably close to 70, maybe, or something that around that age. And he wasn't prepared to move to Meknes, where Sheikh Mohammed ibn Habib had his zawiya. And he just couldn't do it. He said, I can't do this. I can't do it. And the putative successor was Sidi Muhammad Bil Qurshi, who was a great uh, wali, who was in the desert, and he absolutely rejected. He said, absolutely not. Go away. Leave me alone." And he had his own community there, but he wouldn't venture into the city. He didn't want anything to do with it. That tariqa languished for about 25 years until Mullah Hashim Balbiti was revealed as a sheikh, and he led the Sufi order until he passed away. And again, now there's no designated sheikh. So this is what happens with these traditions.
One of the other things that I think is also critical, and this is something which I've realized a lot of people that are exploring Sufism kind of shy away from it. One of the things that they shy away is they're afraid oftentimes to indulge in things that they don't aware or which are not supported by, which they think are not supported by, let's say, in some capacity, hadith, or that is not something that is very actively or openly done by the Sahabas or the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And at the same time, they say anything that is kind of introduced or done which is out after the fact of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is something that we should stay away from, right? But obviously Sufism has its own roots. It goes all the way to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How can someone understand better about Sufism? Like if someone had to take a path, just understand Sufism first. You mentioned three different levels, right? Islam, Ihsan, and
Iman,
Iman.
yes.
Yeah. So in these, like, what is the importance? How can people understand that Sufism indeed is a very integral part of Islam so that they could at least start educating themselves on this and understand that this is not something totally new
Well,
altogether?
they need to find the right teachers to teach them. This is something that's understood by the mainstream. The dilemma people are in today is a holdover, leftover from the colonial period. Change in the Muslim psychology, let's say, occurred in about 1798 or 1799 when Napoleon conquered Egypt. This
Mm-hmm.
was a shattering event for Muslim intellectuals, and then from the turn of the 19th and 18th century, or the 18th and 19th century, throughout the 19th century, one by one, every single Muslim country fell under the domination of a European power. And this was shattering and humiliating for Muslim intellectuals, and they were looking for some reason why this was happening. They were looking to apportion some kind of blame. Whose fault was it? Eventually, the culprits were Sufism and the Madhahib al-Arba, the four schools, and the Sufi orders. There were, the Sufi order, there were Sufi orders, but the problem today is that people don't even know what Islam is for. They don't know what religion is for. Religion and Islam is about one thing only. It's only about one thing. It's not about community. It's not about identity. Especially, it's not about identity. It's not about power. It's not about statehood, politics. It's about one thing only. It's about knowing God. That's what it's about. That's what religion is for. And religion is basically a set of tools that we have received, that humanity receives or has received from the messengers and prophets that God has created and sent in his mercy to teach us how to live in the world. and to remind us that we're only here for a limited period of time. We're not here forever. Western secular life or thinking is basically that the goal should be to extend life as long as possible, to fend off death. But death is inevitable. I once asked Dr. Mustafa al-Badawi, who's a great translator, but also he's a great man of God, and he's also a psychiatrist. And we were sitting together, and something occurred to me. I said, "What's the most common cause of insanity that you've encountered?" And I don't know what I expected. I didn't expect the answer that he gave me, but when he responded, it was just so obvious. He said, "It's the denial of death." When you think about it, that's the only thing we know with absolute certainty. And to deny death is insane. It's totally insane. And we're living in a society that is totally insane, basically, because this is the goal. You have people there, they want to live forever. Why? So Allah has given us tools. I mean, Islam is a tool chest. It's not an identity kit. It's a set of tools to help us live in this world and remembrance of God and in preparation for the next world, because we're all definitely going to end up 6 feet under.
I love how you summarize the entire thing, saying Islam is not about all of these other things like community or identity and all of this. It is primarily about knowing God. And I really love the aspect of Islam is like a toolkit that you can use to know God or spend this life in His remembrance so that you do the right things. I was recently listening to a lecture by Sheikh Hamza a few weeks ago, and I love what he mentioned. He was stating that you believe in Islam, right? You pray to Allah and you spend your life in the path or the path that Islam lays out. But also the other religions that we have are also on their own path. It's a separate topic altogether, saying are they on right or not? What kind of, like, if there are some religions that worship the idols, let's not talk about it, right? End of the day, these are all different roads that lead end of the day to God. And he gave a very beautiful example, saying in the day of Qiyamah, right? Allah Himself will go ahead and give clarity about things that we used to dispute. So don't worry about who's right, who's not right in this respective world. We try to be as humble as we could, try to learn, invite people to Islam, invite people because you believe this is the truth. But let's not mock other religions. Let's be humble with the way we are living our lives. And I really love what you just mentioned, right? Because this ties back to that this is a toolkit. This is not that if we are Muslims you think we are right and we can go ahead and mock other religions, because even in Quran there are a lot of verses that say do not mock other gods or idols, because the other people might do the same.
Yeah. Also, the way I look at people who are not Muslim is that they're potentially Muslim, because we're all from the same creator. We're all created
Yes.
from God, and there are many people who maybe even at the beginning they resist Islam, but if they understand what it is, I once said to Dr. Omar Farouk, we were talking, and I think he was taken by this. I said, for me, Islam works. It's effective. It works. If you get up at dawn every day for a week, and you start the week as a depressed person, by the end of the week, I can almost guarantee that heart will be light and uplifted. It's din al-muamala. It's action, and it's clear. It's crystal clear. People in the Western world, or as Sheikh Hamza now is making the distinction between the North and South. In the Northern Western world, which is secular, they have no deen any longer. They have no active way of accessing spirituality. I mean, there are communities, little pockets of people who have you could say the right idea, but Islam is a methodology that works. You will have an effect. If you don't do it, you can call yourself a Muslim and wrap your head in a imma, turban, and wear robes and everything, but it's not going to have any effect on you. It's to do with action. This is why they say that the tongue is the key to the heart. If you
Yeah.
and well, invocation of God is central to our practice, and it's not just a Sufi practice; it's central to Islamic practice. Dhikr Allahu Akbar. God is the remembrance of God is the Akbar, is the greatest thing. And everything. And my teachers, Muli Hashim, he used to say, he said, do whatever you like, but you will regret every hour. Everything is, and we go, waltzing through life in heedlessness. And this is a very serious thing. We want to remember Allah as uh, with every breath. You know,
Yeah.
um, the other thing that is very important for young people who want to seek a spiritual path is that the ultimate practice is salat. So we do dhikr in order to make our salat, to deepen our salat. There was one of the imams who's buried in Beirut was Imam al-Huzai. Imam al-Huzai had a madhab in the early period of Islam during the time of the Tabi'een, which was very widespread in Syria and the Levant, and these in Sham, and it faded away. It lost its support. And I was told that one of the reasons for that was that it was very, very severe, very strict. And part of
Mhm.
his madhab was the rulings as an imam was that you had to, in every salat, every one of your obligatory salat, you had to have at least one moment of khushu', of awe, spiritual awe. And if you didn't experience that, you had to repeat your prayer over and over again. And of
Mm.
course, people couldn't do it, so they migrated to other madhahib, which were not as difficult.
Mhm.
Islam is a very, very beautiful, rich, and very open-minded religion, which has become narrowed over the years. I spent a period of time with Sheikh Ali Guma, who was the Grand Mufti of Egypt. And I remember him saying he's a great scholar, and I remember him saying that, and I can't remember the exact number, but he said traditionally there were, I think, over 80 madhahib in Islam, which gradually, for political reasons, were narrowed down to four. And then there were madhahib for the Shia. And he said if you reinstated the 80 madhahib, Islam would be much easier to follow, and it's not as narrow-minded.
Mm.
We were sitting in a gathering, and someone who was from a very sort of extreme conservative puritanical point of view was visiting this gathering, and there was a really talkative young Emirati who was a student of one of the shuyukh, and some we were talking about someone having a birthday or something, and this man piped up and he said, "Birthdays are haram." And this guy ate him alive. He said, "Everything is halal. Everything," which was shocking. He said, "Except what's haram." And what he was saying is, don't make something haram that is not haram. And this is what people
Wow.
have done, is that you don't want to celebrate birthdays, that's fine. But don't say this is haram because it's not written about in the hadith. Islam is very, very subtle, and the people that really have great, deep understanding, they make things easy because the most important thing is what is in the heart. But they're very meticulous about things like having clean underwear, for example, to pray, and making wudu. I mean, wudu is an act of worship. It's not a preparatory ritual. It is a part of your worship. So all of these things they're built around, and this is why we need a sheikh. We need someone to teach us. There's a saying that has been attributed to Sheikh Al Akbar, Ibn Arabi, and I can't guarantee that it's from him, but this is what I was told. And he said that your sheikh is not the one who comes to you with miracles and illuminations. Your sheikh is the one who can give you what you need. and everyone has uh, specific needs at any given time.
I think a lot of young Muslims that potentially want to go and take this path, right, are oftentimes deceived by this idea that they want to find a spiritual teacher that can perform miracles. And I'm also, I'll be very upfront and honest, I've been in the earlier days, I used to also think that, we should have someone who could perform miracles. That's the wali of Allah. That's the sheikh. They have powers. Yes, they have powers, but as you mentioned, it comes from Allah, right? End of the day. So, what are some first thing, what are some red flags? Like you've laid out what is one of the most important thing is finding the sheikh and a living sheikh where you could sit with, right? But what are some red flags that that okay, this potentially is not a right sheikh, and what are some green flags that that this sheikh seems to be the right that might be able to guide me? Like how do you distinguish between sheikhs, because there's so much noise as you mentioned out there?
So I'm going to read again from this book. Really, anyone who's interested in taking a path should get hold of this book. This man, by the way, was the uncle of Sheikh Muhammad al-Jilani, and he lived to be 160 years old, and
Mashallah.
he's buried in Assam. I think he was, even though he was Algerian, he ended up living in India, the eastern part of India. I think it was Assam or maybe Orissa. Anyway, he was a
Nice.
great saint. Okay, so a seeker traveled a great distance to visit the teaching sheikh Mullah Hashim al-Balqiti in Meknes, Morocco, with the intention of asking him about miracles. Mullah Hashim welcomed the visitor, made him comfortable, and left the room to fetch tea and biscuits for his guest. The young seeker was lost in thought, consumed with the question of miracles, trying to decide how he was going to broach the subject. Suddenly, Mullah Hashim peeked around the corner and, with a twinkle in his eye, and without being asked, answered his guest, "We don't talk about miracles." Sainthood is often associated with miracles, not only in Islam, but in every spiritual path. The vast anecdotal literature of the miracles or karama of the saints of Islam has contributed to the fascination with the supernatural. The retelling of miraculous incidents may leave the impression that these events were frequent and widely known, but for the most part, this isn't the case. And yet, within the spiritual tradition of Islam, particularly in our time, miracles are downplayed. Mullah al-Arabi al-Darqawi wrote in one of his letters, "Brothers, for one of God's servants who is upright, mustaqim, it is impossible that the miraculous things by which God honors his friends will not happen to him as well. But we have seen many fuqara, both earlier and later, wanting and expecting such things to happen to them. Then, if they did not appear, their intentions toward their sheikhs and their paths were ruined. Their opinions of the way turned negative, and they were ruined except for those upon whom God had mercy. They did not know that such miraculous things do not appear unless there is perfect uprightness. Even as the great Sheikh Ibn Ata'illah said, for you to be looking for your own hidden faults is better for you than to be looking for mysteries that are veiled from you." And then it goes on. But the point is that this is not what it's about. And also, what happens when you embark on the path of Dhikr Allah, you have things happen that are miraculous, but they're not necessarily spectacular movie kind of miracles. They're small things. And this happens quite frequently with when you set out on the path of dhikr. I'll give you one example. My late dear friend Shams Friedlander and his late friend and my friend as well, Tosin Bayrak, were in Saudi, and I was living in Mecca, and we agreed to try to meet. And I came to the Haram before Maghrib, and Maghrib was called. I prayed Maghrib and then performed dhikr, waiting for them to turn up at the Haram. And I waited. I made dhikr until Isha, and then prayed Isha and waited for a bit, and I still didn't see them. So I, at random, it was just this random thing. I went out a door that I never go out toward the Gaza side of the Haram, and at the door I met them. Now that's a small thing, but these things, these connections are there because Allah is our guide. I mean, Sheikh Darqawi said, the most astonishing thing is when people talk of distance, because there is only proximity, because Allah is closer to you than your jugular vein. So it's these extraordinary moments that happen. They happen in real time. I mean, I've in the book that I published, now it's more than 10 years ago. This book, Signs on the Horizons, I recount some of these extraordinary things that have happened to me. And when they happen, it's almost like you go, did that really happen? I mean, because it's in real time. It's not in movie time, or you don't have, soundtrack or anything. It's just happening in time. Shams, Allah yarhamhu, was in Medina, and they were sitting with one of the awliya waiting for Maghrib prayer to be called. And the Wali got up about 10 minutes before the prayer was to be called. He said, I have to go someplace. And they said, well, no, but I mean, you're going to lose your place in the mosque. I don't know if they were in the Rauda or near. They had a very good place to sit. And he said, no, I have to go. And he said, no, really, you should just pray and then go. And he said, no, I have to go and pray in Mecca. And then he said to Shams, let us be recorded as the lovers of the Prophet and do 1,000 Salat al Nabi every day. And then he turned around and left. Shams followed him, and he blinked and he was gone. Now, did that happen? I don't know. Allahu alam. But these are things that happen, and when they do happen, you don't talk about them. And I've had extraordinary things. You're meant to report these things to the sheikh, but in my experience, uh, what they do is they tend to say that's good, and that's it. They don't say anything more. Something I had a very, very powerful experience, and I reported it to Mullah Hashim, and he said, this means that your dhikr was accepted. That was it. He didn't tell me this means this, and then you're going. And when I told Sayyid Omar Abdallah, I told him about an extraordinary dream, one of the most powerful dreams I've ever had. And he was in it, and he made me. I flew. I told him the thing is I can fly, so he made me fly. And when I told him about this, his response was, "I wish I could fly." That was all. I mean, they don't. They don't. This is not what it's about. It's about purifying the heart and purifying thoughts. Now, the other part of your question uh, relates to how can one discern a true or sincere guide. One of the things that Dr. Mustafa al-Badawi said to me not too long ago, he said, you have to remember that this is not about people. This is about Allah, God, guiding the seeker to himself. And sometimes he guides us to people who are limited in one way or another, or flawed in one way or another, in order to teach us something. And he said, if you're sincere, you're safe. People get caught up if they, and this is part of the problem, is that people don't know the basics of Sharia. If you understand Sharia, if you have the foundations, then it's harder to fall into these traps with people who are not authentic. I'll read from, Sheikh Hamza, many, many years ago, he translated a seminal text by Sheikh Zarruq on ways to determine whether someone is authentic or inauthentic. And because even in his time, which was hundreds of years ago, this was a problem. And having people of false claims has been part of the tradition for, as we said before, from the very beginning. Let's see. And again, I'm purposely reading from this. I mean, the quotations come from multiple texts. But this is kind of a handbook for seekers to try to
Yeah.
help them on the road.
Yeah, and I'm going to have the link of this book on the description of our podcast as well, so that the seekers
Mm.
that get moved by our message, right, they can easily find and order these books for themselves as well.
Yeah, right. I'm hoping to publish this book in a different format, but
Mm.
I have some other things I have to do first. Okay, there are a number of things. First of all, there is no question that the sages profiled in this series were neither supernatural nor infallible. This is very important. Our aim, in fact, is to present these beautiful souls in all their humanity without romanticizing. The authors, whether they were their students or not, fully and deeply understand the humanity, frailty, and mortality of their subjects. However, being human does not mean surrendering to immorality and evil. The suggestion that every exemplar must necessarily have an underside does not apply here. There have, of course, always been individuals within the Islamic tradition who have set themselves up as spiritual guides or role models who have gone astray one way or another, betraying the trust of their followers. But these people would be automatically disqualified as exemplars. We have seen numerous cases of this today, and one of the reasons for publishing this series is to provide younger audiences with a glimpse into what a true exemplar is. The Whiskey Priest or Tartufian Lecture. You have to have a little bit of literary background to get these references. The Tartufian Lecture do not exist in the particular universe we are exploring. The exemplars we are profiling are men and women who have subdued their lower natures and effaced their egos through purification and by the grace of God. We understand that everyone sins, even saints, but the sins of a saint are of a different order than from those of ordinary people. When someone asked the 9th century Egyptian saint Dhul-Nun al-Misr about repentance, he answered that the common people repent from sins, whereas the elect, that is, the authentic saints and sages, repent from heedlessness, that is, for forgetting God for one instant. To the modern mind, the existence of people like this may seem inconceivable or fantastical, but within the tradition we are investigating, they are very real. They are our true exemplars. For this reason, we made certain that the individuals being profiled lived out their lives according to the highest standards of humanity and have selected sages that passed away within living memory. Their stories are complete, their lives examined. And keeping company with these people is part of the practice of what we call suhba, companionship. Suhba is not just with saintly people; it's with the people who follow these people. In other words, the communities that surround them, keeping company with like-minded people. This is one of the first order. This is the first thing that one needs to do is to separate oneself from people who will lead you to heedlessness and keep company with people who can encourage you to remembering God. Sorry. I put all these tabs here. Okay, here we are. I once asked Sheikh Abdul Qadir Isa about spiritual authority, and his answer was typically gruff and delightfully terse. He who is connected to the one who is connected is connected. He who is connected to the one who is not connected is not connected. It's as simple as that. And it's this connection that is there, but it's more subtle than that. It isn't, it's not a matter, we live in this age now where people imagine that they're walking down a supermarket aisle and they can, I think I'll try this one out, this shake out, or that shake. You'll get nothing out of it. If you're going to someone to test them out, you're already going to be veiled from
Mm.
whatever result. You have to be driven by the heart and be open. But if someone does something that's wrong, then there's a different. Then you can act upon that. In this connection, the one who is connected, that is the crux of the matter, and also a source of not a little uncertainty. Who are these connected people, and how do we find them? The first criterion in recognizing a spiritual guide is that he or she holds fast to the Sharia and Sunnah with no deviation. This is very, very important. Sidi Ahmed Zarruq, radiallahu anhu, identified 5 positive qualities that make a spiritual guide trustworthy. They are unadulterated spiritual experience, sound outward knowledge, celestial aspirations. That is, their aspirations are not for this world, for the next. A pleasing state, penetrating inner perception. And a pleasing state is something, it's beautiful to be around them. These people, if you're in the presence of somebody who scares you or who makes you nervous or something, then my advice is keep your distance or walk away, because this is not what these people are like. And there are people that they intimidate you and they make you feel inferior or insecure. Anyone who comes to you with that kind of energy, I don't care what people say about them, step away, because these people are the most generous and gentle and kind people. They want you to succeed. They don't want to make you feel, they want, in fact, they see in you something you don't see in yourself, and they don't see you as a completed, you're someone on a path. Anyway, Sidi Muhammad ibn Habib describes a trustworthy spiritual guide in his diwan. The signs of such a one are a light that shines outwardly, a secret that shows from within, and high aspiration. Just to see him uplifts you before a single word is uttered, and should speech come forth from him, it comes forth in a robe, by which I mean lights which run straight to the heart of the one who aspires to God, the truth, without partner. Detachment from what people have is the mainstay of his journey. His work is solely the vision of the friend. In other words, you find someone who's interested in dunya, in stuff and money and these kinds of things, watch out. You're already, it's tricky. These people, they don't care about that. They don't need, it's not, they might be very poor. And his speech is by permission of the best of creation, upon whom the greatest of the saintly depend. If you found such a one as we have mentioned, then go ahead and give yourself without hesitation. It might be difficult for a novice to discern the 5 positive qualities Shaykh Zarruq mentioned and Ibn al-Habib enumerated, but Shaykh Zarruq identified 5 negative traits in a man or woman of false claims that may be easier to recognize. They are ignorance of the religion, disregard for the reverence of other Muslims. In other words, you don't see anyone who criticizes and who's saying backbiting other people, even if what they're saying is true. You have to be careful. Engaging in matters of no concern to him, and this you see this with people of false claims. They start interfering in people's personal lives, within their marriages and their work, and they get involved because they can't really help. They can't help a person in any real sense because they don't have the tool, the inward knowledge to be able to do that. Following his caprice in his affairs, unashamed displays of bad manners followed by lack of remorse. And I've seen this. This is kind of a prototype. And you can see this. And if you see this in somebody who is in the position of being a teaching sheikh, walk away, And it's very easy. I mean, there was an issue several years ago about someone who remained nameless who was doing inappropriate things with women followers. And the women were, traumatized by this. But my reaction initially is if he was making advances to you in private, what were you sitting in private with the sheikh for? And their excuse was he's the sheikh. That doesn't mean anything. Just because someone is in a position doesn't, if they're not behaving according to the Sunnah and the Sharia, walk away. Say thanks, bye, good luck, So Sidi Muhammad ibn Habib wrote, many are the pretenders to this role who utter falsehoods and fabrications seeking wealth and worldly rank, unaware that anyone who claims to be what he is not will be shown up as a liar by trials. For it is by being tested that a person is raised up or brought low. The true masters of the way, however, find their sufficiency in knowing God and have no attachments to anything except God. If they speak openly of anything, it is only to mention God's bounty. For the Most High has said, and as for the bounty of your Lord, mention it. Sheikh Ismail, a Idrisi spiritual master from Sudan that I used to sit with in the noble sanctuary in Mecca, said to me, anyone who claims to be a sheikh is a liar. That's as blunt as you can get. And the reason he says this is because these people never claim, they don't deny if they have this ism. They don't deny it, but they don't go around saying, look, I'm a sheikh.
Mm,
And they don't go, they just, they have that function. And it's a very heavy, heavy responsibility. And none of these people really want it. They're forced into it by force. Someone who wants to be in a position like that is, first of all, crazy, because it's a very, very heavy, heavy, heavy burden. Ibn al-Habib had 1,000 followers. So they were his responsibility. They were on his
yeah.
back. And there are other shuyukh who have many more than that. They have hundreds of thousands of followers, and they have some kind of spiritual connection with each of these people. And unqualified, the critical issue is, do they have the capacity, qualification, and spiritual authority to guide people on an inward journey? An unqualified pretender is more dangerous than an unqualified quack pretending to be a cardiovascular surgeon. For this reason, Sheikh Ismail said, the man of false claims is the worst person on the face of the earth. They're meddling with your spiritual health.
Yeah.
We have seen that false spiritual guides are often divisive, denigrating other Muslims, shunning those who harbor doubts, disparaging and humiliating their followers, and creating a cult-like atmosphere. True spiritual guides bring people together in reverence and respect. They always encourage. They give hope. They teach by their knowledge, wisdom, humility, and beautiful character through a good opinion of God and His creation. We've also seen false spiritual guides interfere with the lives of their followers, disrupting marriages, livelihoods, and living situations. This is a sure sign that something is wrong. On the other hand, true spiritual guides rarely, if ever, interfere with the personal lives of their disciples. Imam Abul Hasan al-Shazali said, if a merchant becomes our disciple, we do not tell him, leave your business and come. Similarly, if a craftsman becomes our disciple, we do not tell him, leave your craft and come. Nor do we tell a student, abandon your pursuit of knowledge and come. Rather, we confirm everyone in that which God has established him, and whatever portion he receives through us will be his as well. The companions became disciples of the Prophet, of the Messenger of God, but never once did he say to a merchant, leave your business, nor to a craftsman, leave your craft. On the contrary, he confirmed them in their various means of livelihood, instructing them to be conscious of God therein. How a spiritual guide earns a living is an important indicator of authenticity. The
Hmm.
8th century sage Ibrahim ibn Adham, who had been the ruler of Balkh, carried wood and harvested crops to support himself. The 20th century sheikh Sidi Ahmed bin Mustafa al-Alawi was a cobbler, as was the 13th century saint Sidi Saleh al-Kharaz, one of the sages known by Muhyiddin ibn Arabi. Of the sages in this series, Habib Ahmed Mashur al-Haddad was a merchant scholar working as a trader to support himself and his family, and guiding his students and disciples without ever asking for or accepting payment. Sayyid Omar Abdullah Muini Baraka, my teacher, worked his whole life as an educator and later as a diplomat. Sheikh Saleh al-Jafari was a student of Al-Azhar, supported by his family until he received his Alamiya degree and secured a paying job. His mother was so proud of his achievement that she asked him to send something from his salary, not because she needed the money, but to share in her beloved son's success. Sufi Abdullah Khan was a working man his whole life, first as a farmer, then as a soldier in the British Indian and Pakistani armies, and then he retired from the military and immigrated to England, and he worked in a foundry where he eventually became shop foreman. Turkish sage Muzaffar Ozak Effendi sold books from his shop in the Sahaflar Karcheshi Cherkessi. Sidi Muhammad ibn Habib was also a teacher in the Qarawiyyin Mosque for 45 years and was able to support himself and his family with passive income from family investments. He never took any payment for his teaching. He taught for 80 years. He never took any money for teaching. When he was 65 years old of age, he used an inheritance he received from his father to purchase a building in Meknes, which he made his zawiya and supported from his own funds. Ibn al-Habib's first guide, Sidi Muhammad Lahlu, was the head of the Tanners Guild in Fez. And it goes on like that. And these people were ordinary people. One of the great Syrian shuyukh, whose name escapes me right now, but he was a union representative. He was a tradesman, a union representative, and apparently among the many qasaid that he wrote in praise of the Prophet and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, um, he also wrote union qasaid, extolling the union and so on. I mean, these people they're salt of the earth. They're real people, and they're very human as well. And there's one last thing on this subject that I want to mention, and then this is simply that this quest to find the sheikh is something that one should aspire to, but there's a secret in it, and it's written for one. If you meet someone who is known to be a teaching sheikh and you don't feel a connection with them, it's not something to worry about. To, to feel as if you failed in some way because you just don't, you don't get it.
Hmm.
You don't feel connected to them because these things are written by Allah before our existence. It's a matter of destiny. And I've mentioned this in Signs on the Horizons in relation to my connection with Habib Ahmed Mashur al-Haddad. I hope anyone who's listening to this is able to get hold of a copy of the book because it's very useful. It covers some anecdotally. It covers these subjects. But when I was when he used to spend 6 months of the year in Jeddah and 6 months of the year, more or less, Mombasa. And one year I was just very caught up and busy and running around and working and that kind of thing. And I just kept putting off seeing him. I was always a little intimidated by Habib, even though he was so sweet. He was very sweet to me. And I said, I have to go and visit Habib. So I went to his house and I discovered that he was on the way to the airport. He was leaving to go back to Mombasa, and I felt awful. I felt really heartsick that I missed the possibility of sitting with him. And I rushed to the airport, and I tracked him down. I found him in the sort of the main area, waiting to be checked in. And I went to him, and I was nearly in tears. And I said, "I am so sorry that I didn't see you. I feel terrible." And he was very kind. He said that you're always with me and I'm always with you. And I thought that was very sweet. And I nearly broke down and wept. Just I was on the edge of tears. And it was so kind, so gentle with me. Some months later, I think, sometime later, I can't remember when exactly, I mentioned this to Sayyid Omar Abdullah, and he said, "Did he really say that to you?" And he became very serious, and I said, "Yes, yes, he was very kind and gentle." And he said he wasn't being kind and gentle. He said, "No
Hmm.
sheikh is permitted to say something like that unless you are his murid from before your existence, before the time. This is written for you." And he said, "You have to take his hand," which I did.
MashaAllah.
But there's a certain recognition now. We are kind of what you call distracted and unclear, but the shuyukh understand. They understand.
Yeah.
They see whether they're permitted to take on a murid or not. And some of the shuyukh have very few murids. Mashish, who had one murid, and the murid was Imam Shazali. Imam
Wow.
Shazali was the founder of a spiritual
Yes.
tradition that uh, attracted millions and millions of followers. But his sheikh had one student, and that was Imam Shazali. So there are
Yeah.
people like that, and then there are people who have hundreds of thousands, even millions of followers, and how their relationship with followers is a secret. I have no idea how these things work. I mean, I was told, and God knows best whether this is true or not, that Habib Ahmed Mashur al-Haddad was one of in the spiritual hierarchy, he was one of the autad, one of the four pillars. There's the qutb, and then there's
Yes.
the two shuyukh. Anyway, and I was reading, I think from Hujwiri, and he mentions that one of the duties of the autad is to circle the earth every night. I have no
Wow.
idea what that means.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of useless information for someone like me. But just think about that. And people, well, that would be amazing. But I don't know about that. Not really.
True.
It's a very, very heavy responsibility that
Yeah.
these people
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
Even having one student, is a big responsibility that you have.
Yeah, I think one last thing that I think would be beneficial for us to probably end on, right, would be now obviously we have a lot of different madhabs, people like we have Hanafi school of thought, we have Maliki, right, we have Shafi'i, Abu Hanifa, different madhab, different school of thoughts. Now, obviously there are different opinions, differences, right? What can we do, like based on your understanding, your experience so far by learning with all of these scholars, teachers across the world? What can we do to make our community stronger so that all of us could make Islam whole and try to make the community also at the same time better?
I think what you're getting at is not fighting.
Yeah, not fighting, and
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think all of the four schools are authentic, and these things are details or matters of that are very specific actions. They're action oriented. Imam al Ghazali said that, as far as I'm concerned, the words fiqh, jurisprudence, and fahm, understanding, mean one and the same thing.
Mm,
Fiqh is to help you understand how to perform the prayer and deal with the world as it is according to the Sharia. But there are subtle differences, and these are small differences. Anyone who makes this major issue, is, especially in this time, is wasting his and other people's time. Uh,
mm,
the most important thing is that we keep to the Sharia, keep to the five prayers, fasting, zakat, sadaqah, pilgrimage, and suhbah, and all the practices that have been left through the hadith. And these differences of opinion are really, I don't think, as far as I'm concerned, they're not that important. Someone else may consider them to be the primary importance. But if it becomes a point of discord, then
mm.
it's what you have is something that's satanic. Abul Abbas al Morsi said, "Our group, we call the shots with shaitan, not the other way around." In other words, if you find people fighting over these things, this is shaitan. This is dividing us one from another. It isn't that if someone's doing something wrong. I mean, I had a discussion with a very good friend of mine, a woman who is a very learned Muslim scholar, an Azhari scholar, and there was a statement that was made by one of the ulama saying that we are inclusive, we accept everyone. We accept, he said, there are women who are very pious, but they don't wear the headscarf or they don't wear the hijab all the time. But we accept them. There are men who don't have beards. Except anyway, she took great offense at the statement that we accept women without a hijab. And I said, but he's not saying that you shouldn't wear the hijab. He's saying that we accept everyone. We
Yeah,
accept people who are sinners and everything. Well, yeah, the awliya, uh, Sheikh, I think it's Sheikh Shustari. He said, is in the pig, the ape, Christian, the atheist, everyone is a part of the reality, and we don't accept their actions. We don't accept we don't eat pig, but we don't. They're part of the creation. Allah created them, and I mean, we were in a Maulid, and there was an old fakir that we were sitting and talking with, and a wasp landed on his emma, and my friend Izzadeen, he just went to
Yeah.
make it go away.
Yeah. Fly.
And the
Yeah.
old man said, "What? Are you approaching kufr? Are you approaching unbelief?" He said, this is Allah's creation. Well,
Wow.
so I mean, he was smiling when he said it. He said, are you becoming a kafir now? Is it? Well, what? I was just trying to do something nice for you. But he said,
Mm,
and then he recited the Qasida of Sheikh Shustari, where, he said that the Christian, Jew, the pig,
mm,
the ape, everything, everything is from Allah, you know.
yeah.
And he said, this man, he said, even the atheists, his sheikh told him, don't reject anybody. So if that's the case, then all of these people who are rejecting someone because they don't, I mean, I had some friends of mine went to Kano in Nigeria, and the first day they were there, they were praying with their hands like this, and someone next to one of our friends kept pushing his hand down in the middle of the prayer, and this guy kept pushing his hand down, and he kept up. And at the end of the prayer, the man next to him, he said, "You can't pray that way because the last person that did that, they killed him." You know,
Wow.
it's we're living in a crazy world.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And that is where I was coming from, because I've seen a lot of young youth thinking that their way or what their school teaches is the right way. But as you mentioned, right, all of these four schools are the right schools. It's all about, we're not fighting within each other, respecting the differences. And let's understand, I mean, Islam, as you mentioned, is a toolkit. It allows, it is a very flexible
and you
religion.
have
It
to
gives you.
to you have to know how to address someone, because if you're aggressive
Yeah.
and negative and you're talking about people, you're telling someone that they're going to go to hell if they keep doing something, then they're going to probably just turn their back on you and go to hell.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
you have to be gentle with people and patient and things. And also, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you expended everything on earth, you would not be able to bring people together. Allah can bring people together. So true, Allah is enough for us. So we have to
Sallallahu
learn
alaihi
this. Um, and it's very important.
I think we pretty much covered almost all of those questions in one or the other place. I think the only thing which was there was why people are turning away from religion. I think this beautifully ties back to what we were just talking or discussing about right now, right? Like, how do you
Yeah.
communicate to people? Like, are you aggressive with them? Because if you're being aggressive, obviously the people are going to turn away from
Well,
religion.
also, this is a very important point because people are turning away from religion, but this is an old story at this point. We don't live in a theological or world any longer. We don't live in even the West. We don't live in a Christian world or a Jewish world, a Judeo-Christian world. Islam, sadly, are become forms of identity rather than practices that people actually follow, other than through superstition and rote. And I'm including Muslims as well. I mean, they think that they're the chosen people, and so therefore they're better than somebody else. But the fact of the matter is that we live in an atheist world. We live in a world where
Mm,
God, in the West, people can't even say the word God. I was listening to a podcast on spirituality. I don't know, something I ran across. And I was listening, and the interview, she was asking questions of the interviewee. And one of the questions, and what she said was, and this is a podcast on spirituality. And she said, "What about a G word?" She couldn't even say God. I
yeah.
mean, it's we're living in an atheist age. Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher who actually went mad at the end of his
Mm-hmm.
life, in 1882, he made his famous declaration that God is dead. And what he meant was that over the 200 years or so prior to that point, that the intelligentsia had lost their faith. They no longer believed in God because of science
Yeah.
and the Renaissance and Darwinism and all that kind of thing. He said, but basically, that's not a good. He was an atheist, but he said it's not a good thing because it's happening. And he predicted. He made a sort of very sort of grim prediction. He said that the loss of faith. I'm paraphrasing this. He said the story I have to tell is of the next 2 centuries, 20th and 21st centuries. He said the 20th century will be an age where, because people have lost their faith, and they will associate themselves or align themselves with what he called barbaric nationalist brotherhoods, and they will
Mm.
commit wars of a scale and cruelty unheard of in human history. Pretty creepy.
Yeah.
He said the
Pretty creepy.
21st century will be far worse, because
Yeah.
by then the tenets of faith will be so weakened that there will be a revaluation of all value. And this is what's happening since the turn of
Yeah.
this century. Then you have all this gender confusion. You have people have to now, young people have to, they're told that they have to make the decisions for their own welfare, that they have to find their truth, right? Which puts them in an incredible position. I mean, an impossible position. That means from infancy to death, you have to spend your life figuring everything out on your own. Okay.
Yeah.
Don't trust anybody. It's all meaningless. And the only way you can get meaning is you make it up yourself.
Yeah.
It's insane. And I see this effect on young people, and it's absolutely heartbreaking. And
Yeah.
it's our job as people who are devoted to learning about the wisdom of Islam and the wisdom of the prophets, that we try to help people understand that, because the alternative is terrifying. It's very, very serious. The work that you're doing, for example, this is very useful, because we need to open these discussions, and and you know, someone made a very anti-Christian film called The Rapture. I forget who the filmmaker was. I think it was James Tobin. Anyway, he
Mm-hmm.
was attacked by Christian groups for being anti-religious, and he said, "I'm not anti-religious. I'm anti-God." You
Mm.
know, the atheists, they don't care about religion.
Yeah.
They denigrate. They want to eradicate belief in God. And
Yeah.
this is really, really, really scary. I'll leave you with one last thing. When I was young, I was sitting on Oxford Street waiting for a bus. And at that time, I wore an Emma, in London. And this old lady came up to me and she said, "Son, I don't know what you believe in, but I'm glad you believe in something." And really, we're in a situation now where belief is so important. It's so essential to health and mental health and to spiritual health. So anyway, thank you for having me on your
Thank you so
podcast.
much, Michael Sugich, for joining us on the show. I think what you ended on is a very important thing that all youth should definitely consider and think about, because end of the day we all operate based on the value system that we have, right? And Islam or any religion basically have their own set of values, so it actually gives you like a starting point for you to spend your life. But the moment we get towards that end of the spectrum, wherein you turn an atheist or you get into this nihilistic ideas about everything is meaningless, then that is when the everything does not seem right. And then if and now, as you and I know, right, like there's a lot of thing in the West where people are confused, children are confused around what identity they should be having. Parents are
Mhm.
telling them that you can choose to be what you want, and that's not the way to start, because they are kids, they don't know anything at the moment. So playing by emotions is not the most right approach, right? But I think having a value system is something that really helps. And personally, I've realized that, and to be very honest and upfront with you, there was a time in my life where I had lost faith in my religion as well, in Islam too, and I was exploring. I did not know. I was kind of an atheist. But then I took a journey. I traveled for a month. I went to a lot of places, met a lot of people, learned and started learning. And the more I read and learned about science, the more evident it was becoming to me that, you know what, because science has a limitation. Science will tell you how things are done, but it does not tell you why it happened. And I was curious with the why. And I knew that, you know, if Big Bang happened, why did it happen? And if it happened, who created it? Like for something to happen, there has to be a creation. And that's when my discovery with God began. And I'm glad it began, because though I was born a Muslim, I think what is more important is for us to discover Islam for our own selves, get into that journey, because that's when you will have the faith then you have is more profound, is more in you. So it's not only that you believe in, but it's a part of you. So I think Islam gives you some really good value system, or any religion for that matter. If you think this is working for you, please go ahead, but have some value system. That will give you some starting point, and then keep learning, keep exploring. And conversation like this is helpful, right? Because now you've shared your learnings over the years, your 60, 70 years of experience you've shared with us that would benefit me and the audience that are listening to us. So I really appreciate you joining us and sharing all of these insights.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And inshallah, we'll meet again here
Inshallah.
or in India.